Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
Want awesome health? How about doubling your energy? With our free Awesome Health course, you can get a new video and lesson every single day for 84 straight days. The course covers everything from optimizing your digestion, nutrient intake, correct health issues, including weight, skin, energy, immune system, and so much more. The course could easily be worth $200 or $300 for, and yet it's 100% free when you go to bioptimizer.com. That's bioptimizers.com. Once you're there, just enter your name and email to get the first 3 phases of the Bioptimization report. You'll get the report immediately and begin getting your video lessons each and every day from there on in. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about freeing emotional and physical trauma from the body using fascia therapy. And our guest today is Julia Blackwell, who is a fascia release practitioner, educator, and creator of the fascia remedy. Julia was born with severe nerve damage to her right shoulder and grew up going through the broken Western medicine system. After 23 years of being told her condition would never improve and feeling no lasting relief from any treatments, she was introduced to a unique type of fascia release bodywork in 2010. In just 3 months of this fascia-specific work, she saw more improvement in the feel and function of her arm than she had in 16 years of traditional treatments. After learning multiple modalities and working with clients for 12 years, she formulated her own approach for bodywork and foam rolling work called the Fascia Remedy. A Denver local, she spends her free time adventuring with her dogs, rock climbing, and hiking in Colorado's tallest peaks. And she joins us today from the beautiful state of Colorado and Denver. Welcome to the show.
Oh, Wade, thanks so much for having me on.
All right, so let's talk about fascia and emotional treatment. So by the way, if anybody out there has actually had some fascia release therapy, like Rolfing, it can be really painful. I remember getting a Rolfing treatment in Vancouver years ago. Actually, there's 2 different guys that give me, but the one in Vancouver a couple of years ago, I do believe that the practitioner was a sadist. And I was in that experience thinking to myself how cruel torture actually is, because it was a very sick and painful form of torture. And then I would get the relief and the results, and then a couple weeks later, I would go back again. I needed enough time for the pain associated memory to go away before I could go back again. Now, I've had other therapies that were less painful, but I want to get into your component because there's an unwinding, there's a tie-up of physical and psychological, emotional traumas that are trapped in our tissues, and sometimes we identify them or we're resistant to letting these things go. So, what's your whole experience on fascia and treating it, and how you can let's just start with the basics and understand what is fascia. And why is it so important in conditions such as you suffered? And maybe you can give the background behind that.
Ooh, so many questions. But yes, we can start. We can start with simply what is fascia. And fascia is the biological fabric that holds absolutely everything in our body together. It's what organizes every bit of material and water that we have. If it were to magically disappear out of your body, you would go tumbling to the ground in a pile of bones and goo.
So basically a bag of milk.
Yeah. Yes. It's what prevents us from just having all of the water in our body puddle at our feet, right? It's what's creating our shape, our structure, and even our texture. If if you've heard any of the word, if you've heard the word fascia being used as a buzzword, I've heard it a lot around cellulite being related to fascia, which it totally is. That's a textural thing, right? So it's shape, structure, texture, it's all related to fascia. But fascia does so much more than simply hold us together and create our posture. It's what allows our muscle and joints to glide. It's what allows our lymphatic system to have the space to pump and detox. It's what brings hydration to absolutely every tissue that we have. It absorbs shock. I mean, the list goes on, but there's also a massive proprioceptive element to fascia as well. It has its own communication system that can communicate outside of the nervous system. Of course, they talk to each other, but I think that portion of the roles of fascia here is what can create such intensity when you're working with fascia. We have 10 times as many proprioceptors in our fascia than we do our muscles. And so that element is creating a lot of awareness, a lot of intensity when we go in trying to work through those things. So like you, I've had experiences working with fascia where it was really intense. I was up at a 8 or 9 out of 10, and I thought I needed to push through. But something I've come to understand after working with fascia for a long time is we want to find the sweet spot where you can breathe through the diaphragm and move your body through a range of motion. And that could be as high as a 7 out of 10 on your intensity scale. But ultimately, yeah, once you're getting up at that 8, 9, 10 out of 10 intensity, it does take a long time for your body to recover because it's essentially traumatizing it. So we want to find that sweet spot where we're not traumatizing the nervous system and it will allow the changes that we want to make to happen.
Right. So I can think of another fascia release program that I did with a doctor. He was a former surgeon and got into Rolfing, versus the other guy where the guy was essentially he was a butcher.
Just laughing at your pain,
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of. But both had a really distinct understanding of anatomy. And I think that was a key element of understanding how these tissues go together, how the fascia interplays with each other. So I want to illustrate for the listeners who's not familiar with this, can you explain the different type, okay, there's the different types of fascia that are inside the body, is it one, there might be thinking it's just one big milk bag, it's a bunch of other minor, can you explain the different structures of fascia, how it works and how they interact? Do you understand what I'm trying to communicate here?
Yeah.
The
So
difference between organ fascia, muscle fascia, outside fat, it's all categories under fascia.
Right. There are different categories of even connective tissue, like blood, for example,
Right.
is considered a connective tissue. But there are a few certain types of fascia. There's superficial fascia, there's deep fascia, there's visceral fascia. But sometimes one of the easiest analogies is to think of it a bit like plastic wrap. So it's plastic wrap that's wrapping around every single thing you have. So every muscle fibril and multiple fibrils make up just one muscle fiber. Fascia is also wrapping around that. It's wrapping around the muscle itself. It's wrapping around the tendon and the ligament. It's wrapping around the bone. It's wrapping around blood vessels, nerves, organs. And so it's more like a 3-dimensional plastic wrap suit that you have on the inside. And it's one uninterrupted interconnected system. So while there are different tiers and different areas that it surrounds, it all works together.
Okay, so if you're looking under a if you're looking under a microscope and you see the separation between all the cells, what's separating them is essentially the fascia.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Fascia
so I want
is
to give
even through the cellular level. It's wild.
Right. So would you say that fascia is equivalent to mycelium in the forest?
Oh my gosh, I love that you brought that up so much. That is exactly it. I've used that analogy so many times, is that yes, what you're experiencing in one area or on the surface somewhere, that communication is happening deep below the surface and it's communicating to the entire host of things involved. That's a great one.
So one of the concepts that I'm trying to share with the world today as a way of understanding our role in the universe as humans is to stop thinking of our lives as an individual, exclusive environment. That I am a single cell of the human body throughout all of time. In other words, there's 10 million generations, 10,000 generations before me. There's 10,000, say, after I'm gone. I'm transferring genetic information and I'm performing some function within the human body throughout time, the whole thing. And therefore, our interconnectivity means that the interests of all of the people that are in the human body are of importance, not just myself or my city, country, political, financial, like all of these things that are using to divisiveness to me is an obstacle to the human body throughout time. And my equivalent of that is looking at mycelium, which we say, oh, there's mushrooms popped up here. But that is just the outgrowth of like one lifetime popping up as this mushroom, which there's an undercurrent which literally connects the entire forest. These are ginormous organisms, probably the largest organisms on the planet. And we don't see it because we don't see it. And I think it's the same thing. We have suffered from the same component. So therefore, any self-healing is actually healing the human body itself, right? And so it helps us bring into balance and remove these obstacles to unification conceptually, because we're too hyper-focused on me, the individual, isolated as it's me versus the world, or it's us versus them. And I think that also contributes to the level of trauma a person is actually experiencing. What's your take?
Ooh, I love it. Yes, that if we want to go deep into the proprioceptive element of fascia.
Can you explain proprioceptive for our audience, just so they understand?
Yes, they're nerve receptors, but they're what tell our body not only where we are in space as it relates to balance, but how much force to use, what direction are we going. But I like to zoom out of that a little bit, which is it's constantly taking in data from both our external environment and internal environment. So essentially, these things are telling us, how do we make sense of the world around us and how do we understand our place within that world? So when we're getting all of this information, whether we know we're getting it or not, it's passing through our fascial system. Our fascia is taking stock and logging all of these experiences away, whether they're experiences you have now, or, we could even talk about like epigenetics and things that maybe have been transferred to you from long ago, from your family passed down. But all of these things have been logged away by your fascial system. One of my favorite quotes from a mentor of mine is, fascia is like the paper your life story is written on. And so I see a lot of emotional releases and a lot of even changes that happen in people's personality and in their life when they start releasing fascia. I mean, that is if they're open to it. I myself experienced that when I first went through that big initial fascia release experience working on my arm. I had a couple people tell me that my personality changed, luckily for the better. But I became a lot more open-minded and wanted to try things. And I started hiking mountains and learning how to mountaineer and doing all of these things that people were like, I just had no idea that was the kind of person that you were. And it was because that element of freedom and getting rid of these things that felt so heavy and limiting in my life were suddenly disappearing. So I love the concept of thinking about this system as it relates to ourselves and our own trauma, but then that's absolutely going to affect the people that we're around and the world that we're in as well.
that's a really potent statement for people to sit with for a second, that trauma that's genetically inherited, or whether it's created through a physical event or a psychological event that can manifest inside of the fascia, because this is an informing intermediary between our inner self and our external world, essentially, right? And it's very fast. And not in the conscious, it's not really a cognitive process. This seems to be working independently of our consciousness. We only become aware of it at a certain point. So based on that, what one would say is that fascia could be one of the limiting factors in your life, not necessarily the story that you have around the trauma. The story is a protective mechanism that you're using to rationalize. And once you obliterate the actual trauma through fascia release, then invariably the story has to change.
Absolutely. I mean, growing up, I was born with this nerve damage to my arm, and growing up, I went to so many different doctors and practitioners. I went to physical therapy, occupational therapy, all of the things. Every person that I went to told me, there's nothing we can really do for you. We can stretch your arm a little bit. We can recommend a couple different things that you do, but ultimately this is irrevocable. This is your life. If anything, it's going to get worse over time, which is a pretty insane thing to tell anyone, let alone someone who is very young. But that was a story that, even though I wanted to keep trying new things, it was ingrained into that mind-body connection.
Sure. Quick question on that, because that's a really important point. One of the things that I advocate with our clients, customers, friends, all that stuff is like, everybody that you're hiring that's an expert is working for you, not against you. And whatever their diagnosis comes up does not mean that's an absolute. It means it's an absolute within their frame of reference, which is ultimately limited.
Right.
No matter how good you are, there's more that you don't know than what you do. And I'm constantly dumbfounded. And if we look at the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous, I think there's a really great thing that Carl Jung did in the world, is when Roland, whatever his name, went to see the Carl Jung to try and overcome his alcoholism. Everybody died before that with alcoholism. He went to the great Carl Jung, and Carl Jung said to him, well, my art or my craft cannot help you in this situation. However, it has been shown from time to time that people who've thrown themselves into a spiritual perspective have made recoveries. Now, this was terrible for Roland because he was an atheist. But basically, we're talking about a paradigm of consciousness itself. But what was amazing about what Carl Jung was able to state was the limits of his own expertise, as magnanimous as that is, or as massive as it is. One of the greatest influential psychologists in the entire world had the humility to say, well, I can't help you, but you might want to try that. How often did you experience that in the medical condition? First question. Second part of that, what kept you fighting through it to this other thing? And then three, what was the aha moment?
Short answer is zero. Zero people said something like that.
Why do you suppose that is?
I mean, truthfully, most doctors and practitioners are educated in a very specific set of things. Surgeries, drugs, that kind of stuff. And so they probably didn't know. I mean, I still meet doctors to this day that don't know about fascia.
Well, expertise is, an expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less.
Yeah. I'd say, your second question of what kept me pressing on, whether from this experience or maybe it was just an inherited part of my personality, I've always been a very dedicated, determined, and at least when I was younger, I was much more competitive. And so there was a part of me that anytime someone told me that I couldn't do something, I was going to make a point to prove them wrong. So
I call it the FU gene. I have one.
I have it. I have it for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm just like, if people heard of the NTFR and they're all that, well, I have the FU gene.
Yeah, well, one of the things was I really wanted to play volleyball. I had watched my sister play it, when I was 10 years old for a season, and I begged my parents to let me play, and they were very apprehensive. They were like, "I don't think you can do this with your arm. We're not sure if it might injure it." And I was like, "I'm going to do it." And so I ended up figuring out a way. I practiced daily. I ended up making all of these teams and beat out people with no physical limitations at all. I actually got a scholarship and played in college for a Division II school in Ohio. So there was that side of me that was like, well, I'm just going to keep pushing to see what I can do despite this thing. So while there's certainly some amazing stories to be told with that level of perseverance, I will say that it came at the cost of being more disconnected from my body. It was more about seeing what I could do to beat it into submission. So my real
there is essentially a punitive approach towards, it's a Nietzschean approach. That which does not kill us makes us stronger, which I embraced that model as a bodybuilder when I first started out. I watched Conan the Barbarian, and that was the lead line at the start of that. And so I was just hooked. Okay, pain is my friend, right? Suffering is optimal. And there is value in those monikers because it helps the avoidance of, which I think limits a lot of people. Like I always say, the pain train's coming to everybody's life. It's going to make a stop at your doorstep. Psychologically, emotionally, financially, relationship-wise, health-wise, like it's coming to everybody's doorstep, no matter what you do, how healthy you are, how vibrant life, how cool you are, how great your life is right now. The pain train's going to come.
Yeah.
So I invited the pain train, and to just be getting on it. Is that something that you embraced, obviously? And what was that like? What were some of the things that you tried in your journey?
Oh man. I mean, I certainly had more of that mentality where I would say, how high can we turn up the electrical stim machine? How hard can the massage therapist dig into this spot? What tools can I use to just, again, sort of beat my body into the position that I needed it to be to succeed at this level? It was more about a really underlying motive of that my body had betrayed me and I was working against it this whole time. And so again, there were some great things that came out of it. I've won a lot of tournaments. I've played a lot of really high level, I've played it at a very high level, and it's great to look back on. It was a really fun time of my life. And I had that aha moment when I worked with that first fascia release practitioner, where I had to start actively moving my arm with the fascia release. And so suddenly I couldn't be against my body. I had to work with my body. I had to actually feel the feelings that were in it. I had to let go of a lot of this tough guy mentality that I had. I think the first time someone told me that I was tough because I was able to play at a high level with a really serious injury, I was like, wow, I love that. Because before then, I'd always felt very fragile. And so It was like letting go of this layer of, I don't have to be so tough. I can actually go into a healing mode. I can work with my body. And that was actually the key to starting the real healing journey.
So let's go take you back to that session. How old were you at this time?
23.
How long have you been? So basically, this has been a nonstop mission since you were small.
Yes.
So you're carrying essentially a developed idea or association with yourself. that has some benefits on a competitive nature, maybe some optimal from an emotional side of things or psychological stuff. So you had this experience. What happened in that experience? Like what happened in this moment that was the aha thing? And then obviously you ran with this. Like, so when did you start seeing relief of these symptoms from that first time? How long was that journey?
I mean, it's still ongoing, if I'm being honest. I'm still unwinding a lifetime's worth of tension and the psychological part of this whole injury. But I knew within the first few sessions that I felt different, that I felt like my body was taking a sigh of relief. And then slowly these things started happening where at the time I was a personal trainer. I was helping people mostly with corrective exercise. And so I was obviously doing my own strength training. And all of a sudden I felt that my lat was starting to fire on this right side, and muscles were starting to interact differently in a way that they never had before. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And so then the next one, I was at a training, and one of the practitioners there very gently was working on my sternocleidomastoid, which is on the side of your neck. And it was a very gentle compression, and I was moving my head around a little bit. And suddenly I was crying. Just tears are streaming out of my face. And like pretty much everyone does, and all the times it's happened in my office since then, I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I'm crying. It's not like this hurts. And he had to explain to me what an emotional release was. And this area is very near the scar that I have from a big nerve regraft at about 4 months old. And so that started opening my eyes to the fact that all of this trauma and this experience, this one is actually near, that one was actually near my scar, but it could happen anywhere in the body. And these emotional releases can start happening. And that's what really took the relief to the next level. So it was especially significant those first like 6 months, I would say. So many things were happening back to back. But I still find areas in my body that I'm like, ooh, this feels deep. This feels emotional. I didn't know this place existed. And I'm still working through areas because it just makes me feel better.
Okay, so you experienced a certain amount of relief, and then you decided, okay, I'm going down this as a career path. Is that what happened?
Yeah, I obviously was taken by such surprise. Nothing. When I tried just about anything you could think of, nothing had made a lasting impact until this. So it really did, in the most lighthearted sense, like it made me question who I was as a person, because I was like, well, who am I if I don't have this thing that I've had my whole life? So
Correct.
it was a really, big moment. But seeing this change of something that was supposed to be permanent at the time, like I said, I was training, and I started being like, okay, well, if this can be this powerful for me, what can it do for the host of people I'm working with that have shoulder pain and lower back pain and just, the everyday aches and pains that most people have, or post-surgery, that kind of thing. Because I've always, had a heart for people that are also struggling with limitation or pain. So I went and learned one of the first fascia release modalities and started working on people immediately. I'd be like, okay, for the last 10 minutes of our session, do you mind if I do a little fascia work on your calf or on your shoulder? And I started getting so many more results with people so much faster when I started working with their fascia than I did with simply corrective exercise. And so that sent me down working on, I'd convince people more and more to do a little bit more fascia release. And then I started getting people that just wanted that. And it turned into a full-fledged business in about 8 months. It was pretty quick. I think even though no one really knew what it was, they just kept hearing that it was some kind of magical wizardry.
Yeah, that's what I have a terminology I refer to my various people in my life that have it. Like they're part of the Jedi Council of Wizards. So people ask me, I'm like, yeah, I got a wizard, go so and so to this and this, and when the thrush strikes 3 times and the sun lines up then you can see the wizard goes.
Oh yeah. One of my first clients, in the first year, she was like, "You're still in my phone as voodoo lady." Because we did like
Yeah,
1 or 2 sessions and she was
fun.
like, "Doing fine."
I think that's part of the fun. I think if you can make things entertaining as well as healing, I think there's a lot of the sense of the joy of the call to adventure to overcome the dragon that's burning down your village, which is whatever you're suffering from. And so wizards come along and like Tolkien and, knock on bag end and start the whole thing going, and it looks like a casual interaction at first, but then the life path completely changes from the musings of a wizard.
I will say though, one of the most fun parts of this is that because of the active work that you as the person getting the work done has to do, it's so collaborative. Like I'm there to find the right spots or even just be a coach through certain movements. But when people are like, "You did this is amazing." I'm like, "You did this."
Mhm.
You are the one that chose to be an active participant in your own healing process. You're the one that was breathing and moved through the ranges of motion that you needed to. So it is fun to be like, well, we're both wizards. We both make things happen.
So you start taking this on. So how would you categorize, say, the work that you do, maybe versus other forms of fascia? Or maybe you can outline a little bit of what fascia release is, or what are the various modalities, and how you have incorporated your unique style into this comprehensive world that people might not have heard of. Because one thing that could happen, people listen to this podcast, they run out the door, "Hey, I'm looking for a fascia expert."
Yeah, I mean,
Which,
the good news,
that's yeah, what's going on there?
yeah, I mean, the good news is anyone who's working with fascia intelligently, I think you're going to see a positive result from it. I'm certainly not here to downplay anyone else's modality or work. The two main components of the fascia remedy and just the way that I personally work with fascia, it's built on 2 things. So number 1 is how to release fascia. I think we spoke on it just briefly. One of the roles of fascia is to protect us. It's how we absorb shock and impact. And because fascia wants to protect us from an unwanted change after, say, a crash of your mountain bike or an accidental bang of your elbow against a wall, it doesn't like to change. It won't change easily. And so I come at it in a way of compressing and then actively moving through a range of motion. So most treatments out there are very passive, in my opinion. You lay on a table, you hope someone else makes a change for you. And sometimes that works, or sometimes it works, it just takes a long time. But if you can find the right area to compress and actively move through a range of motion, it's going to cross fascial fibers differently. It's also going to engage our nervous system in a way that seems to more quickly interrupt poor movement patterns or really entrenched nervous system patterns. It can even help your brain understand that it's safe to access certain ranges of motion again. So I'm a big, advocate for combining those 2 things together. And then secondly, I'm all about finding where to release fascia. So it's not just about the how, but where matters. So in that intricate plastic wrap suit that we wear on the inside, there's also essentially a system of pulleys. And our body wants to be balanced as much as possible. But, through injuries, through underuse, most of us are not really moving the way our bodies are intended. Or on the other side, overuse. If you're playing a sport, you're swinging a baseball bat over and over, you're swinging a golf club over and over, things like that. Fascia can start to stick to itself. It can become more dehydrated. It can start to pull that pulley system out of alignment, and then you end up with pain somewhere else. So where you feel pain is rarely ever the problem. And I think that's a big missing piece in a lot of practitioners' approaches, in my opinion, is, oh, you have a knee problem. Let's make sure the muscles around your knee are strong, or maybe let's look at your ankle or your hip. But ultimately, that's not really the way our body works. Everything is working together. Your fascia is wrapping around the cardiovascular system, the muscular system, the skeletal system. It's all connected, and what may be actually causing the knee pain could be in your opposite shoulder. So I'm really big about finding where is the actual root cause and what's creating the imbalance that is therefore causing whatever issue you're experiencing.
Yeah, I love that. That's important, and that's part of the art, I think. Like there's the science of, okay, here's your fascia, here's your muscles, here's your tissues, here's your injury, here's that whole component. But then there's the actual being able to finesse or intuit. And I think their combination of that is, okay, I have a baseline of knowledge, I've got some experience, so that I'm going to be able to, from this, intuit where I need to start focusing on because of that, which is not always self-evident.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
No, unfortunately, it's not. I absolutely understand that common sense would say, oh, if my lower back is hurting, there must be a problem with my back. I totally get that. I've done a similar thing. But there are certain patterns that are pretty consistent throughout the body as well.
Such
as I call it the opposite connection, where a lot of times the opposite side of where you're feeling pain is the issue. So for example, if you have a lot of pain in the back of your neck or in the upper back, most of the times fascia restriction in the chest, the scalenes, maybe even the SEMs are really the culprit of that. Or for a deltoid pain, I know this is a more complicated opposites, quote unquote, but if your deltoid is hurting, it's usually the lat, which I would consider on the opposite side that's contributing to that. So if you're going to start somewhere
more
more simply,
muscle group. So as you press, the lat needs to release. And if there's tension in here, it's now distorting how the shoulder would go. And anyone that's had a shoulder injury that works out would understand this.
100%. That's a much better way of saying it.
Yeah. It's the antagonist distortion of the movement pattern. And there's really cool stuff when you get into like the myotatic reflex and the Golgi tendon and these kind of nervous system triggers, and full range movements versus partial range movements. And full range movements have a really interesting point that when you go past a certain point, there is in a perfect situation, there is the release mechanism on the opposing muscle group. And that actually allows for a stronger contraction. I learned this years ago with Scott Abel, my bodybuilding coach. And so that the stretch position was actually a key element. And for example, in a squat, which most people in North America don't squat, and the ones that do don't squat properly, there's a point if you're doing a full base squat, the last few degrees, if you're squatting, you can actually feel that release. And the timing of that was at the bottom of that point, and you'll see this with really great strength athletes, is there's like a they time that release with the bottom stretch position and explode out of it. So that's what it creates, explosive power. Most people don't operate in a full range of motion. Most people don't know how to work groups. Most people have some sort of compromise injury, oftentimes related to their seating patterns. So virtually everybody that's listening to this podcast right now or watching this on YouTube are going to discover that there's a whole laundry list of things that you think is causing this ache and that pain, which are actually, you can go to a massage for it, but it's the movement pattern of your life that is distorting that. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. Yes. And things tend to build and build, right? So
Yes.
I've done this myself, so there's no judgment here, but you might wake up one day and you're like, oh, my knee's a little sore, but I'm sure it's fine. I'm going to wait till it goes away. And in a couple of days it goes away, and then you probably forget that it even happened. But the reality is your body is going to find the most efficient way for you to exist without pain. And so what likely happened, instead of your knee just healing itself, is that your body found a way to compensate so that you didn't feel it anymore. And then the next time, maybe your hip hurts, and then in a week or two, it goes away, and this compensation builds on top of compensation. And now you have to go unwind all of those fascial tension patterns that have been accumulating for, years, decades, your life.
When I took up running last year, I wanted to run a marathon, and I only had 6 months to do it. I started running. In the first few weeks, I'm go from no running till I'm going to run a marathon. And
bold.
I remember early on in my runs, I'm out running on the seawall here in California, and I get this excruciating pain in my knee, like bad pain. Like, this is not good. But this is not like, hey, my muscles hurting. This is like bad. And I remember running this through my head, this exact metric. I said, okay, I could damage my leg here. Number one. Okay. Number two, I haven't run before any distance since I was a kid. So there's likely a suboptimal movement pattern here that's creating some sort of impingement, which is registering as pain. And then number three, I was like, well, what would Jocko Willink do? Jocko Willink, the Navy SEAL, would just keep running. So I decided I would keep running. And I'm like, hello, Mr. Leg, I got pain. And I remember saying to yourself, yes, I'm in pain. So correct the movement pattern. Fix it. I'm going to keep running no matter what. So I thought my body, in its innate intelligence, would correct it. And it did. That was the cool part. It did. So my pain bothered me for a couple of weeks. I get the pain at that point, and I would just run through it, and then eventually went away. And then it didn't bother me more. And then when I ran the marathon, I got exposed at about mile 21, the wall. It's real. And the areas in my body that were hurting were not necessarily related to me, but it was some other compensatory part. And that's where I gassed out. I had to suffer through it for another 5 miles or whatever till I got to the end, but that's fine. I did it. But I could have done a lot better had I had this. And then I went to this osteopath guy, and I'm getting to a point here. I went to an osteopath. I went to my chiropractor first, and he kind of identified what happened. And then he showed me where it was happening. And then I went to an osteopath as well, who was able to unlock the piece, because he's a pretty interesting guy. But he used something that was really interesting, and I'd like to know your experience. So is that common that people will get an owie and then they kind of go in and you kind of change that movement pattern, and then it just kind of goes away magically?
If it's recent, yes. It usually, the more acute and new the injury is, the faster it goes away.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. Because the movement pattern is not as deeply ingrained?
I believe so, yes. Or there's, a lot less of that possible spiral tension pattern, or a whole series of things that might be tight in the fascia from 30 years,
So beyond movement of the fascia, this person did, they gave me, after a couple sessions, they gave me an injection of procaine. Are you familiar with the use of procaine?
No, I'm not.
So it might be, I'll lead that up to an investigation. Well, procaine, which is interesting. So I want to get your opinion on this. So Fascia, he was a surgeon, became an osteopath, very interesting guy. I'm gonna get him on the podcast one day. And he talked about fascia and the levels. And he said, so imagine your tissue at a subatomic level is like buckyballs, Buckminster Fuller, those geodesic domes. Okay. And when you have a trauma, physical, emotional, psycho, whatever, this dome kind of collapses and can distort in whatever way. And then you don't have enough energy to reinflate it back to its level. And depending on where that torques or breaks down, you can get impediments on your nervous system, on your blood supply, on any various components, which is because you don't know where that fascia structure, imagine the fascia structure is that what holds the buckyball together. That's been altered, and you unwind that. And what he demonstrated was that procaine, which was a derivative of the cocaine plant, and it was developed by Sigmund Freud, because most people don't know Sigmund Freud had a cocaine addiction. And cocaine being highly toxic, he asked for the German chemists to make a non-toxic synthetic version of this, which they created procaine. And so he used procaine instead. Now, the interesting thing about it is not in taking a dosage to affect your cognition, but if you take an injection on a traumatized site, it has the ability to erase the memory of the trauma in that site, and then it's gone, and then you train the new movement pattern. And I experienced that, which was radical. So anyways, it's worth investigating. Long story short, yeah, so you used a combination of that, and there's other people who do it in pain management, like I've had, and you can feel like meridian lines that have been disrupted, and like then you get into all kinds of really cool things. So it's very interesting technology. When someone is coming to see you, what's the procedure? Like, how do you determine what the goals and objectives and timeline that someone is going to engage in to unwind their body? Well, we're all wound up one way or the other.
I know. I usually can tell a lot simply by looking at someone's standing posture. So ideally, all of your low joints, your shoulders, your hips, knees, and ankles, they're all aligned both vertically and horizontally. I will say, I don't know if I've ever seen anyone be perfectly in line, myself included. But that gives me a lot of indication on what is rotated, what is being pulled. There's, all of your fascia is connected, but there are certain trains that are more interconnected than others. I don't know if you're familiar with anatomy trains. That's researched by Thomas Myers, but essentially it's, if you were to pull on one end of your fascia, say up in your temple, this whole series of bones and muscles would move along with it that are all interconnected with that line. So I can tell a lot just based on how someone's holding their body. Sometimes I have people walk and do a few movement assessments. And then I have my idea of what I think ought to be released, but ultimately the person's body is going to tell me what they need. So I will start releasing areas that I think would be helpful. And then I rely really heavily on their feedback. I really, truly believe the body is super smart. It knows what it needs. And I'm still surprised every now and again, I'll release something that I think is unrelated. And someone is like, that was the thing. And I was like, well, great. I am never bored at this job because, as much as I can be trained in patterns and anatomy and all of these interconnected lines, every once in a while, it could have been energetic. It could have been something really deep that I just have no way of knowing. But then that person's like, yes, that was the thing. So it depends. There's certainly guidelines, but then I'm ultimately going to let someone else tell me what's feeling the best for them. And it depends. So in person, people usually feel a difference in 1 or 2 sessions. It depends on how long, like we were mentioning earlier, how long have they been entrenched in these patterns or been experiencing this thing. When I'm working with people virtually, essentially I'm using the same principles of fascia release, the how to release it and where to release it. I just use tools like foam rollers and massage balls and talk people through how to use them themselves. I think it takes a little bit longer with tools because consistency is so important. You can't add quite as much weight yourself as a practitioner can add for you. So it usually takes a little bit longer, but again, even in just a couple weeks, I'd say 90% of people feel a difference in just 3-4 weeks, even with foam rolling.
And then beyond that, so usually when people get into a modality, there's the reduction of the problems or challenges that are faced with the initial problem. And then you get into that, and then you start unwinding other things. And there's a discovery process that begins to shift one's relationship with self. How many people kind of start going and they become addicted to the unwinding of themselves into a new aspect? Like how often is that discovered? Because I always say that all dis-ease is an opportunity for growth.
Mm-hmm. You know, it pains me to say, but it's small. I bet it's 5%. Just guessing.
95, just come in, fix the problem, see you later, never see them again.
Yes, I have tons of people that they are ecstatic that we fixed it back, or the next time I see them, maybe it's a year later and it's a different thing. I don't know. But the small percentage of people that get it, it's so amazing and fun and so cool to see. I've actually been working with one such person. We've been working together for almost a year and a half now, and she had a car accident. Her whole body was twisted and torqued in weird directions, and nothing had ever helped her before she came to see me. And she started feeling better within just, a few months, but she was like, I want to see how I can continue to change my posture. I want to see if I can let go of this holding pattern I haven't been able to discover. And then she'll come in with things like, hey, I want to try this today. If you were to pin this place, I want to try this movement. And it's like, oh my gosh, yes, woman, yes, you get this. Because she's just looking for these ways to feel differently in her body. And she's one that she said she hadn't cried in like 5 years, and doing fascia release, not from pain, but it was the first time she had been able to cry in a really long time after a few sessions. And she's just, the change in her personality, the change in her body, the change in just her overall mental state is significant. And she's always like, I wish everybody would do this. And I was like, me too. But sometimes we just want to fix the problem and move on. I get it.
What else do we need to know about fascia and its importance for quality of life? What are some other elements that are not beyond just movement patterns? You talked about organs and things like that. How does fascia restriction impair organ function?
Yeah, so since fascia wraps around every single thing, it very influences the position and function of everything. So if you are normally slumped down in your chair or curled up in a tiny ball watching Netflix for hours and hours, fascia is going to start to stick together between the organs, form little adhesions. Those adhesions might end up sticking to your back. It could cause back pain. It could cause digestive issues. It could cause some difficulties with being able to breathe really deeply into your diaphragm. And there's it can restrict blood flow from getting to those places. I've worked with a lot of people over the years with the tingling hands, especially when they sleep, because fascia is so tight around the shoulders and the thoracic area that blood flow can't get to the hands anymore. Yeah, I mean, mobility issues is a huge one. We have kind of maybe barely touched on, but if something is not able to move in a full range of motion, that's also a fascial issue. And also stress, if you're chronically anxious, if you are experiencing any PTSD, things like that, or just chronically stressed in general with your job or with life, as it were, these days. Stress very much impacts fascia, and it will usually send the signal to fascia to contract. And we already talked about fascia being a protector. So fascia can contract independently of your muscle. It's a subconscious thing. That's how it's able to protect us from such impacts as crashes or slips and falls. And so essentially, when your proprioceptors are telling you that there is a threat detected internally in the form of anxiety and stress, your fascia will respond saying, "Ooh, we need to brace for impact." So it'll contract and essentially brace for an impact that never comes if you're feeling chronically stressed. So there's also a big impact that, if that's something that you're experiencing, you may feel dehydrated. You may feel like you're getting injured all the time. You may just feel heavy or dense. Those are all signs that, stress is impacting your fascia as well.
Got it. That's so let's go. We're going to wrap up on movement patterns because it's kind of a circuitous route on that. What are the most common impediments in movement patterns that you're seeing in the modern world that is relatively reasonable to find relief in with what you're offering?
I think because of the amount of sitting that we're doing, I'm seeing a lot of forward head, rounded forward shoulders. Interestingly,
The texting neck. I've heard that they're getting bone spurs in the back of young kids' heads now.
Oh my gosh.
That, like horns are coming out in the back of the head because of the tension that creates calcification.
Yeah, your bone is trying to grow out to meet the tendons that are being very, very stretched. Dang, that's so unfortunate. But yeah, I'm seeing that all the time. Almost everybody needs a lot of releasing through the biceps, the pecs, the pec minor, and up through the scalenes. That's very common. I've been seeing a lot of very heavy anterior pelvic tilts with duck feet lately too. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but people walking with their feet pointing outwards and having a very exaggerated arch in their lower back, which is interesting. I'm still actually trying to decide what that's from. You'd think when we're all slumped over in poor posture, it's usually putting our pelvis in a posterior tilt, but it may be hip flexor tension. It may be just a lack of strength in most people's hips. We do so little full articulation of our joints, at least in modern world for most of us. We sit in 90-degree chairs. We often don't get up and down off the floor very often, so that could be a part of it too.
Got it. Any other ones?
I'm like, oh man, I'm working on too many people right now. Wait, I'm trying to just pull from this insane list. I'm like, there's a lot, but I would say, especially in the upper body, I'm seeing a lot happening there lately.
Right. And then one last thing, gonna go to a bonus here. On the emotional, psychic kind of life, so let's get out of the physiological components. What are some of the things that happen for people on that deeper side of the equation where people talk about the mind-body connection, mind-body spirit, and that there is an interaction of those things in your body? What are you noticing in that thing? What have you experienced that people who are willing to kind of let go of the linear and dive deep into the non-linear? What are some of the things that get uncorked for people?
I've seen a lot of interesting things happen releasing the core area, enough so that I've started warning people before I work on that area that something emotionally might come up for them. I've had a couple of emails where people are like, "Hey, I feel great, and also I've been crying for the last 2 days." I'm like, "I'm sorry." And also,
Right.
we think
I've divorced my spouse and I'm moving to Bali.
I mean, I did have someone who had just recently gone through a divorce. We worked on her core and it was so gentle. I really was not going super deep. And she she was burping for the rest of the day. And she called me and she was like, I feel so nauseous. I don't feel well. Something is off. And I was like, listen, I'm super sorry that you're experiencing that. And can you think of anything that this overall feeling reminds you of? Or is there anything that's like especially present for you today? And she called me the next day and she was like, oh my gosh, I've been going through a divorce and this feeling of being toxic in a relationship and feeling so unsure of myself that it was making me nauseous. I really found an answer in this, what I was feeling, and I feel incredible today. So it was like some of these really weird feelings, whether it was anger, sadness, feeling that was a weird one. I've never had anyone else experience something like that, but people having really big steps of letting go of something that felt really stuck or really stagnant. Our meridian lines are heavily interconnected with fascial lines, and emotions are just energy in motion. So if something's stagnant and suddenly we get blood flow there, we get lymph moving, we get, the structured water of our fascial system into a new area, it's just going to move energy and things. I've seen a lot of people make positive changes or just let things go that they didn't realize were burdening them through the course of, I never know where it's going to happen, but it seems to happen a lot in the core and in the ribs, really releasing someone's tension so that they can breathe fully and feel grounded makes a big difference.
Sounds like so much fun. I got to go over to Denver. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Where can people find you, find out more, book a treatment, all that sort of stuff, get dialed in?
Yeah. Well, I'm most active on Instagram, so you can follow me at Movement by Julia, or all of my services and online courses and things of that nature are all on movementbyjulia.com.
Julia, this has been fun. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thanks so much for having me.
For our listeners, I would like to encourage you, if you've had impaired movement or you believe that you have impaired movement, I think that fascia release is a real option for people. And not everybody thinks about it. Not everybody goes down that route, but it's worth investigating. I've done a bunch of it. I've had tremendous results. Virtually all of my close biological optimization friends have had something on this level. And especially in chronic conditions or you get those negative diagnoses, well, you're just gonna have to live with this for the rest of your life. It's an accident I had when I was a kid. I can't unwind this. You can really, it's remarkable how the body can actually heal and recover from lifetimes of trauma, let alone just this one lifetime. And so whatever your challenge is, I think that going for some sort of fascia release program could be very helpful in letting you live your best life. So thank you, Julia, for joining us. Thank you to all our listeners. If you like it, share it, pass it on, refer someone, or tell us you hate it and give us the negative feedback, because I like that too. We need to know how we're serving you, but I think this was awesome. And so thank you all for joining us. I'm T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. Be well.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion. And a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.